Hey everyone, Nerdy Pastor back, and it's been a while. I finally got moved into my new office. It's actually a temporary office, as you can see from everything back here, kind of a temporary setup here. It's still got boxes of books and stuff, but I did move officially to Virginia. I'm here, I'm getting settled in. I just started my job yesterday, and will be moved into a more permanent office towards the end of the month, towards Christmas, and then hopefully we'll start full-time preaching in January. So between now and then, a lot to get prepared for, a lot of research to do, preparation to do, meeting with staff, meeting with church members, getting together with the session, the diaconate, and those things. But in the meantime, it's Advent, and Advent started last Sunday, and came across an outstanding collection of Advent tracts, and meant to be used devotionally, but they really were published as tracts by J.C. Ryle during his ministry in England in the 19th century in Suffolk County. Interestingly enough, I am living now in Suffolk, the city, Virginia, Suffolk County in Southeast Virginia now. But this book's called Christmas Thoughts, and just came out recently, and it's an edited version by Andrew Atherstone, and he puts together 5 of his well-known exhortational tracts into a little volume here that the Banner's producing. I got it for I think $15, which is I think with how handsome it is and how good the material is, well worth buying. But I just wanted to bring to your attention, I think, a couple thoughts from his tracks, specifically one, and then I thought I would do maybe one more, a reflection on his tracks, and then also another one on Bonhoeffer. Bonhoeffer, in his second volume on his sermons, he has at the very end of the second volume 2 Christmas sermons that I'm going to be reading as I prepare for some sermons myself during the Christmas season, and I'll give you maybe some thoughts on that too. But what makes J.C. Ryle so noteworthy all the time for reading, and this is I think why Banner publishes him so abundantly, is he has one, he's got a great breadth of learning, that's clear, but he has this combination in his writing and his preaching that's something that is should be coveted in a good way. That he has a simplicity and clarity on one side that is hard to achieve. Yet, at the same time, there's a depth. There's a depth of profundity in it, yet also an urgency and an evangelical fervor to it. As you read through these tracts, you'll see that combination, and it's actually very hard to achieve. It's easy to speak simply about something, but not with a whole lot of urgency, because people, when they hear simple things, they kind of then dismiss it. Or I've heard this before, or why do we have to hear this again? They just kind of immediately dismiss it. Instead of diving down deeper into that simple truth and giving greater urgency to the person to apply it to themselves, Ryle is just a master of it. He's just a master of it. So in the second tract that I got to read recently, it's called What Think Ye of Christ? A Christmas Question, based upon Matthew 22:42. And he asked 3 questions regarding Christ and about our thoughts of Christ. And he says it this way. He said, first, let us consider why all men ought to think of Christ. Secondly, how many think commonly of Christ. And thirdly, what are thoughts of true Christians about Christ? First, he says, why should all people think of Christ? And he says it with simplicity and fervor. Here it is. He says, all men ought to think of Christ because of what Christ has done for all men. Whew. Wow. Think about that. We should all be thinking of Christ because of the universality of the ministry of Christ. And that just immediately brings to the fore, I need to consider Jesus, right? Beautiful application. Now, then he goes into a more difficult, this is kind of more the zeal, right? The fervor for the truth of Christ, right? The true Christianity, the true religion, and the pure practicing of it, as the Puritans especially are known for. And he says, here are some common thoughts about Christ. And he kind of goes from bad to worse, it seems like. He says some are blasphemous, some are vague and indistinct. He says some have a wickedness and unholiness. They treat Christ with this, high views of election and doctrine, but they live like hell. And they live in a way as if God has given them license to sin or to live as they please, right? There's a dishonoring and kind of libel way of living, as he says, a mean and low, crude way of Christ, treating him commonly, right? And so he goes into all these things, and then he has this great pastoral transition in his tract. And see, I've heard this a lot. When you get into your sermon and you start to give apologetic things for Christ, you start to give distinctions between true religion and false religion, or you give distinctions between true worship and false worship. You make a distinction between true practice of the scriptures, and falsification of the scriptures, such as the Roman Catholic addition to scripture with tradition, or cult manipulations of the text, all viewing the Bible as insufficient for godliness and salvation, right? Viewing the church or additional prophecies or additional prophets to Jesus and his Bible, right? You make these distinctions in your sermons and teachings, and many people don't like that. See, they don't like that. They feel like all you need to do is be positive, right? J.C. Ryle has a good correction to that. He has a great one here. This is what he says. I leave this part of my subject here. It is a sorrowful and painful one. So he acknowledges the difficulty of it, but it's not without use. And then he says, it is necessary to study morbid anatomy if we should understand health. Great thought. Then he says, the ground must be cleared of rubbish before we build. What a great thought. Pastoral, honest, but yet still fervent and zealous and truthful. It's really, really good stuff. And then he gets into the very last point, which is the thoughts of true Christians about Jesus. And he speaks about that they have high thoughts of Christ. They have hopeful thoughts of Christ. They have trustful thoughts of Christ. Most importantly, he says they have experimental or real experience of Christ. And then he ends at the very end with this kind of putting it to us, the question, what do you think of Christ? And he does it with real urgency, and he says it this way, reader, this might possibly be your final Christmas. What do you think of Christ? I think it's important for us to think through that with urgency. Myself, especially, considering Christ. This could be our last Christmas. We don't know. This could be the last one this year. We might not make it to the next one. And we're not trying to speak in a morbid way just for its own sake, but to clear the ground for health spiritually, to clear the rubbish, as he says, to build, right? And to consider these things so that then we can put ourselves into a better view of what it means to know Jesus, right? In a season so filled with amusement, sometimes good things, sometimes not so good. It is hard for us as believers, even believers, to really gaze at Jesus, to fill our souls with the light and the love and the life and the truth of Christ, because we're so busy glancing here and there at him, but really gazing at the world. So consider this as we think about Advent together. And I'd love to give another few thoughts on one more of his tracts this Advent season, along with some reflections on Dietrich Bonhoeffer's Christmas sermons. And lastly, I'll just say this. This is a prime time of the year. You know my channel is all about books in a lot of ways. That's definitely one of the main points of my channel, to disseminate good Christian literature to folks and to help people read not just scripture, but good theology and just good practice of Christian living together. This is the prime time to buy good resources. And I would encourage you to think, typically between Thanksgiving and the end of the year, mostly, all the Christian publishers have huge sales. And those of you that follow book sales know that. I'd encourage you to buy book sets. I really would. They're at a premium price at this time of the year. Books that were sold for $380 are being sold for $200. Books that were being sold for $80 are being sold for $40. I just bought the 3-volume works of Thomas Peck from Banner for $42. I mean, it's pretty cheap for what you're getting. It's pretty profound stuff at a premium cost. Very cheap for what you're getting. So consider that, and consider buying that for somebody else too. Someone who's serious about Christianity, maybe someone who needs to be serious about Christianity. It would be something that would say, hey, I value these works, and I think you should too. I want you to consider it. This might be a good time to do that as well. So consider as you find good Christmas Advent devotionals, and as you're reading through the narratives of Jesus' birth and coming to earth in the Gospels, as you're considering the prophecies of Isaiah, especially 7 through 11, Micah chapter 5, and other places in the Psalms, considering the Scripture, also find some good devotionals to help you glance no longer at Christ, but to gaze upon who He is and to consider Him deeply during this season. All right, signing off.